You ever wonder what really separates, feeling sad from having clinical depression? Or what makes a simple fear a full-blown phobia? Well, today we're going to dive deep inside the mind and unpack the frameworks that psychologists actually use to define, explain, and understand psychological disorders. So it all boils down to this one huge question. On the surface, it seems pretty simple, right? But defining abnormal is way more complicated than just saying something isn't normal. This is really the central puzzle that clinicians wrestle with every single day. All right, here's our game plan. First, we'll nail down what abnormal even means. Then, we'll look at 4 different ideas about what causes these disorders. After that, we're going to get into some specific examples, from anxiety all the way to disorders that affect mood and even a person's sense of reality. Okay, so first things first. We have to build our foundation. Before we can even begin to talk about specific disorders, we need a really clear clinical framework for what the word abnormal actually means in the world of psychology.
Now, this is where it gets super interesting. To even be considered for a clinical diagnosis, a behavior can't just check one of these boxes. Nope, it has to meet at least 2 of these criteria. And that's a really important rule, because it keeps us from labeling behavior that's maybe just a little eccentric or different as a disorder.
And all of that leads us right to the official definition. The takeaway here is that a psychological disorder isn't just some quirky personality trait. It's a pattern that causes real, significant distress or gets in the way of a person's ability to just live their daily life. So we've got a working definition of abnormal, but why do these disorders happen in the first place? That's what we're tackling next. We're going to explore how different schools of psychological thought try to answer that very question. A great way to think about this is that there's not just one single right answer. Instead, psychologists use these different lenses to look at the same problem, and each lens gives a totally unique point of view on where these disorders come from. This chart just breaks it down perfectly. The psychodynamic view, it's looking for stuff buried in the unconscious. Behaviorism says, hey, this is learned behavior that's been reinforced over time. The cognitive folks are pointing at twisted, illogical thinking. And then you've got the biological model, which looks at genetics, brain chemistry, the physical stuff. Okay, let's take these ideas and apply them to something we've all felt: anxiety. We all worry, but when does that everyday worry cross the line and become a clinical disorder? And this is the huge difference. Normal anxiety is a reaction to something stressful. It can actually be helpful, It's what gets you to study for that big exam. An anxiety disorder, on the other hand, it feels like it comes out of nowhere and it totally disrupts your life. I absolutely love this quote because it just hits the nail on the head. It perfectly captures what a phobia is. A phobia isn't just being scared. It's an irrational, persistent fear that is completely out of whack with the actual danger. And phobias aren't all the same. You've got social anxiety, which is all about the fear of being judged. A specific phobia is tied to one particular thing, like spiders or flying. And then there's agoraphobia, which is this really complex fear of being stuck somewhere you can't easily get out of if things go south. To really get what this feels like, let's put ourselves in the shoes of Daria, a 14-year-old just sitting in her science class. 1 second, everything's totally fine. The next, her entire world gets turned completely upside down. The physical symptoms just slam into her without any warning. And this isn't just feeling nervous. This is a massive, disorienting physical event. She can't hear right, her vision is tunneling, and her body is reacting like it is in absolute mortal danger. And right here, this is the terrifying reality of a panic attack. It's not just the racing heart. It's the absolute 100% psychological certainty that you are having a heart attack, that you are about to die. It is a state of pure, unfiltered terror. Now, having one panic attack, as awful as it is, doesn't mean you have a disorder. Panic disorder gets diagnosed when these attacks keep happening and the person starts to live in constant fear of the next one, changing their whole life just to try and avoid it. All right, let's shift gears into our final section. We're going to look at disorders that have a massive impact on a person's emotional world, and sometimes their very connection to reality itself. So here we're looking at 2 big categories of mood disorders. Major depression is about that persistent, heavy, low mood. Bipolar disorder is different. It's defined by these dramatic swings between that depressive low and periods of what's called mania, which is this intense, super elevated, high-energy state. Now, it is so important that we get this right. Schizophrenia is not split personality. That's a common myth, and it's just wrong. Schizophrenia is what's called a psychotic disorder. That means it involves a severe break from reality, and it fundamentally changes how a person thinks, feels, and sees the world.
One of the hallmark symptoms are delusions. These are fixed, false beliefs that just won't go away, even when you show evidence to the contrary. They can be delusions of persecution, where you're convinced people are out to get you, or reference, where you think characters on TV are talking directly to you. There's influence, the belief that outside forces are controlling you, and even grandeur, where you're convinced you're a powerful person on a special mission.
Symptoms here get grouped into two buckets. Positive symptoms are an addition of things that aren't normally there, like hallucinations or delusions. Think of it as adding something extra. Negative symptoms are the absence or decrease of normal functions, like a lack of emotional expression, what's called a flat affect, or really poor attention. So it's about something being taken away. So, we've walked through the clinical definitions, the different theories about causes, and some really serious psychological disorders. And that brings us to the big final question. Now that we have this framework, how does it change things? How can we use it to look at mental health in ourselves and in everyone around us with a little more empathy, a little more understanding, and a whole lot more clarity?